And I had a good relationship, very good, with both of them. I would tell Zelensky, no more. You got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give them a lot. We're going to give them more than they ever got if we have to. I will have the deal done in one day. One day.
Hang on. I mean, first of all, that again, ending this in one day, Susan Page suggests that they're going to plan to give Russia plenty. That if he's telling Zelensky, hey, that's enough. I think we can read between the lines what that is about. But also, let's remember, he's characterizing his relationship with Volodymyr Zelensky as I knew him very well. Yes, because it was his conversation with Zelensky that got him impeached the first time as he was trying to withhold military aid to Ukraine. And so Ukraine would dig up political dirt on now President Biden. So that's the backdrop to that conversation. But just give us your read here on what we're hearing from Trump. And I will say one of the persistent storylines at the NATO summit in Vilnius last week is this real fear that if Putin can hang on through the American elections next fall and he's rewarded with Donald Trump as the White House, he knows he's got a shot to win this after all.
Yes, I mean, this is a concern we heard from quietly from NATO leaders about what would happen if Donald Trump wins the next election, which is not an impossibility. We heard that first question at that Finnish news conference from a Finnish reporter, can we count on the United States to stick around? Because it would be the U.S. position would be quite different toward the war in Ukraine and toward Vladimir Putin if Donald Trump moved back into the White House. Of course, the idea that the American president, whoever he or she is, could tell Zelensky to make a deal and that he would do so is pretty laughable, given that Zelensky has shown himself to be a pretty valiant leader of Ukraine and someone who is willing to stand up to the United States when he thinks it's in his interest. And the question of when Ukraine will be interested and willing to sit down for a serious diplomatic solution, I don't really think we're there yet.
So, Brandon, there are certainly some in Republican leadership and Senate Minority Leader McConnell, chief among them, who are saying, look, we're going to support Ukraine. This is what our job as Americans to do to bolster Kyiv against what Russia is doing. But there's definitely a strain of isolationism, a strain of Republicans who are questioning whether or not this is the right idea. We know there's some in the Republican House, and those voices have grown louder about the idea of the funding to Ukraine. We also heard from Tucker Carlson at an event he held in Iowa in recent days, really pressing some of the GOP candidates about whether or not this is a good idea. How prevalent or how much of a factor is this going to be for Republican voters as they look at these candidates today, including, most of all, Donald Trump, that this could be, we want to not support Ukraine. We want to do something very different than this current White House going forward?
Oh, it's very real. I mean, the party is so much more isolationist than it was. And we actually saw this vote in the House on the bill we were just talking about. There were amendments offered to significantly limit or even cut off support for Ukraine. And they failed overwhelmingly. But 70-something Republicans voted for that. And it's easy to look at it, well, those didn't pass even close. But I looked at it and was like, wow, that's a lot of Republicans saying they're willing to cut off aid to Ukraine right now at this moment. I mean, I was bracing in that Trump interview for him to say that that's his position, that he's going to cut off, and that's how he's going to end this war. At least, thankfully, he said, he maybe use strength to try to end it. But it's real. It's pervasive. There are a lot of very popular figures out there who push this stuff all the time, and there's an audience for it. And Trump has been one of the leaders of the isolationist movement. You got to say, he's responding to something that he saw out there, but he also drives it a lot himself.
All right. Well, Brendan Buck, thank you very much. We're going to have more on.
Welcome back to the War Room. It's Natalie Winters filling in for Stephen K. Bannon. As you guys probably know, if you were either at the Turning Point conference yesterday or if you watched us on Rumble or Real America's Voice, he gave a very impassioned, very energetic, I have to say. I've seen Steve give a lot of speeches. I don't know if I've ever seen a mic drop before, but so I guess Steve needed the afternoon off. No amount of Red Bull could get him through to the 6 p.m. show, but I'm happy to fill in and bring a whole host and cast of guests, some new friends to the show to talk about all things, not just Turning Point, but of course, Ukraine, what's going on in Congress, what's going on with the Biden regime, even what's going on with Big Pharma's, particularly their war on women. Now, I also had a perfect cold open teed up for who our first guest was supposed to be, which is Congressman Andy Ogles. I know he's going to have to jump at 6:30 for votes, but if and when the studio gets him, they can let me know, because he was one of the 98 Republicans who were brave enough to vote for MTG's amendment to halt any additional funding, at least the $300 million in the NDIA, to Ukraine. He's also been a part of the really indefatigable 20, and of course the 71 who voted against the debt ceiling raise. But in the meantime, someone who is also wonderful, he's not just a friend of mine, but a friend of the show, Ashton Munholland, who is the president of Palm Beach Young Republicans. People may recall that that is the city where the Turning Points Conference was held for the last few days. So if we have Ashton, we can bring her in. But like I said, in the studio, if you want to let me know, and we have Congressman Ogles, I would appreciate that. But Ashton, if you just want to give the audience a little bit of a primer, specifically on what your club is about, but more importantly, how you've grown the membership. Then we're going to get into all things deep state, Ron DeSantis, and of course the Turning Point event.
Oh, our beloved governor. Yes, so over the past 8 months, we are actually a brand new club, and we are one of the fastest growing clubs in the state. We have over 150 members and about 400 people who oscillate in between our different speaker events. And really, it's because there's such a vacuum, I believe, for leadership.
When Ashton's
in 30s. Go ahead.
Congressman Ogles is going to have to bounce for votes. So we're going to get back to that because I want to talk about what you're doing because it's very important. But Congressman Ogles, if you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know whether to blame the Chinese Communist Party or the Ukrainian government for your technological issues, but I digress. But we were talking, I don't know if you got a chance to hear the cold open, but it's basically MSNBC and all their talking heads lamenting how Donald Trump would be able to end the Ukraine war, because at the end of the day, we know that would be bad for the paymasters in the Beltway, all the defense contractors, people who've made a bunch of money off of this war. You obviously were one of the 98 Republicans to vote for the one of the amendments to the NDAA, stripping additional funding to Ukraine. If you just want to sort of walk us through that vote, where that crusade to stop this just unnecessary and endless spending, or at least, we're talking millions, frankly, it's probably going to be billions by the end of this conflict, to Ukraine, where you stand on that, and then we can drill down on some of the other issues you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, when you look at, money sent, equipment sent, expertise that has been expended, we're at roughly 46 billion, B as in Bravo, dollars. That's a lot of money. And so even if you're someone, so some of your listeners who may support the Ukrainian effort, like the question would be is, what's the end game? What's the mission statement? Where's the accountability? And none of those questions have been answered. And so I have a responsibility, even if hypothetically I supported the effort, where's the accountability? What are we going to do? Is there a pathway to peace? What does that look like? What are we doing to achieve that mission? And so, but the problem, to your point, is like this deep state has taken over, and this has just become a cash cow. And when you ask those questions, they look at you like you're stupid. But you know what? I'm a fiscal conservative. You're a fiscal conservative. And we have a right to get the answers to those questions before we spend another dollar on this effort and before we have Americans ultimately ending up getting killed in this effort.
So I want to link this to a really important piece that was published in the New York Times today. You got Haberman and Swan behind it. Steve obviously talked about it in the morning show, but it's talking about how Donald Trump is really planning to crack down on really what is the administrative state, right? The permanent political class, not just the career appointees, but the 16, 17 million people who are on the contracting side, who are, of course, benefiting immensely from this Ukraine conflict. And I think that MSNBC Cold Open complements that story perfectly, because they know Donald Trump poses an existential threat to the endless and forever wars. And like you were saying, there is sort of a disconnect between Republicans in Congress and what the, for lack of a better word, MAGA base is, at least when it comes to the issue of Ukraine. The Turning Point conference that just concluded, they polled members, which you're talking 6, 7, 8,000 people who are part of grassroots, and they said 96% of people opposed U.S. involvement, specifically through additional funding, in the Ukraine war, which really is just a staggering figure. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
And you hear the bell in the background.
I hear the buzzer. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. But, to your point, and again, this is one of those situations where, look, I understand that Russia is a bully. I realize that, this is a complicated conversation, but everything's in context, right? And so the real existential threat to the United States and our future and your kids' future and my children's future is the CCP. And so now you have a Chinese government that literally is ramping up for war. We know that their shipbuilding capability is now greater than ours. We know that they're building their nuclear arsenal. There's constant incursions into Taiwan airspace and naval space. And yet here we are, we're messing around with Ukraine, spending hard-earned American dollars. Some of our preparedness and our readiness is being spent to Ukraine. And not to mention, the Taiwanese have pre-ordered 19 billion, B as in Bravo, $1 billion worth of armaments, and they have yet to receive those armaments. Why? Because our supply chain, our war supply chain, is taking care of Ukraine instead of Taiwan. And let me make this clear. If China decides to make a move on Taiwan, they're not going to make the same mistakes that the Russians have made. There's not going to be this protracted engagement. You're going to wake up one morning and the Chinese government, the Chinese military will have made an advancement on Taiwan, and it's over. And when you consider that all of the technology that's produced out of Taiwan, this is a direct existential threat to the United States of America. And again, that's just not just words. Think about COVID. Think about it for a minute, our supply chains. Think about how hard it was to get basic things like toilet paper or prescription drugs during COVID. We still have ripple effects from COVID in the supply chains and our over-reliance on China. We need to be having that conversation. That needs to be our number one priority, not Putin, not regime change. Look, this is a feud that goes back 100 years. Well, not really, since World War II. It's not going to be fixed overnight, and I'm talking about Ukraine. And so for us to continue to spend money over there without some sort of mission statement, I'm opposed to it. That's our money. Meanwhile, our southern border is porous. You literally can walk across the border. And they now have the cartel saying that they're going to target our border patrol if they start enforcing our laws. To me, that's an act of war because the cartels are nothing more than an extension of the Mexican government.
Now, Congressman, you let me know when you have to go, but we'll keep you for as long as you can. If the audience doesn't know he has votes, but you come obviously from the great state of Tennessee, but that also means that you know firsthand what Chinese Communist Party infiltration looks like. For some reason, I think it's because of your beautiful land and wonderful abundance of agriculture. The Chinese Communist Party has targeted your state quite heavily, but I'm curious, you're a freshman member of Congress, and you really just laid out the case as to why we should be focusing on the Chinese Communist Party. But it seems like the elites in Washington are more concerned with arming Ukraine, let alone defending our southern border. So just in your opinion, like I said, you're a freshman representative, so I'm sorry, you're still getting used to life in Washington, D.C., but in your opinion, do you think the reason that so many people are hesitant to confront the Chinese Communist Party, do you think it's more so because they've been bought off, paid for, infiltrated, and influenced, a la the Biden family? Or do you think it's actually an ideological affinity in the sense of these people want the endless forever wars? These people genuinely just want to shell out millions, billions of dollars to Ukraine just to keep their donors happy. I'm aware the answer might not be mutually exclusive with both of them. But in your kind of assessment, boots on the ground, what do you think the answer is as to why we are so unwilling and incapable of confronting the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, I don't think that's a simple answer. Obviously I'm one of the more conservative members of Congress. I'm a very outspoken member of Congress. I was one of the original 20 that kind of held up the speaker's race because we had to change the rules. We had to change the way Congress does its business. But that being said, I think there's this disconnect. I mean, I think part of it is we are in this 24-hour news cycle. You do have the reality of there is an ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe. And so that's kind of the shiny object that's getting all the attention. It's harder to articulate the threat that the CCP poses. I say that, but you and I just discussed it. It's quite clear. And you mentioned Tennessee, right? The Oak Ridge Laboratory, where, the center of nuclear research for the United States, or one of the centers, that balloon literally flew right through middle Tennessee. And when you look at the range that balloon had in its surveillance equipment, it took in not only Fort Campbell, which is a military base, and our Air Force base that's there in Tullahoma, but also Oak Ridge. It literally threaded the needle between all three of those installations. And if you don't think China's not a threat, you're not paying attention. I mean, at first, and not to mention, the Biden administration just willingly lies. I mean, they get up for breakfast, and I think that's what they do, is they figure out what's the next lie to see that will the American people buy into it. And they told us it was a weather balloon, that it was not a threat, that it wasn't a spy apparatus, that it couldn't be maneuvered. And then, of course, all of that was false. So I think part of it is just the simplicity of, there is this conflict. It is the shiny object. It's the easiest to articulate. There's been this public support and outcry for freedom and liberty, which, hey, I get that. I believe in freedom. I believe in liberty. I'm a big nerd. I love our founding fathers, right? So this speaks to the heart of who we are as Americans for standing up for the little guy, right? But at the same token, that's our dollars. That's American taxpayers' dollars. And I have a right to know how those monies are being spent. And as a member of Congress, they can't tell me. Now, going back to the other part of this equation, what do you do about it? The Biden administration is upset because Trump, if he gets into the office, and I'll say when he gets back into the office, he's going to fire a bunch of bureaucrats. Well, you know what? That's a good thing. We don't need bureaucrats running our country. We don't need bureaucrats spending our money. What we need is elected officials like myself. John Quincy Adams, he said the House of Representatives was a people's house. That's where we do the people's business. That's where we fight and argue over the issues. And I'm also the closest that any individual is going to have to that budget, right? I'm an elected House member. I have to run every 2 years. There's an accountability there. We are the people that should be making these decisions, not unelected bureaucrats. And this administration is woefully afraid of what Trump is going to do, what he should do. That's why I've endorsed him. And quite frankly, in my reelect, when that day comes, I'm one of his first endorsements as well.
I always think the term bureaucrat is too euphemistic and endearing. These people are, hardcore apparatchiks through and through. Their only allegiance is to the administrative state because it keeps them employed. And by the way, Congressman, I think you sell yourself short because you were just part of the 20 opposing McCarthy. You were also part of the 71, I think it was, no's on the debt ceiling. And like we were just discussing, the 98, A's on the Ukraine amendment. Pretty impeccable record. So thank you, sir, for joining us. And we'll have you back soon. But if people want to stay up to date with what you're working on, go to your campaign website, find you on social media. What are your coordinates? Where can they find you?
It's quite simple, AndyOgles.com, or obviously Facebook/Andy Ogles. I'm easy to find. I'm outspoken. I'm a target. They say horrible things about me, but when you're over the target, you're going to take flack, and they don't like the fact that I'm not willing to just sit down and shut up. I'm going to say the things that need to be said. I'm a Southerner. I'm going to be polite when I say it, but by George, I came up here to break things and fight for the American people, and that's what I'm going to do.
I think it's a prerequisite to come on War Room. You have to have the mainstream media say bad things about you. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Have a good one. Now, Ashton, sorry to interrupt you, but I think if we still have you, the studio could bring Ashton back. Again, Ashton is the president of the Palm Beach Young Republicans, and she was just giving us, actually, for once on this show, some good news, some optimism about how she's helping to expand the club down there, the wild numbers of expansion that they're seeing. So if you want to pick up where you left off, and then we'll get into the more nitty-gritty stuff.
Yes, so we're in Palm Beach County, and over the past 8 months, we've had over 400 people oscillate in between our different events that we've hosted. And really, there's just such a vacuum for young leaders in their 20s and 30s that hold our views and are not willing or are not afraid to be willing to use their voices and to stand up for, what we believe in and to create that environment. Before I took over the club, there was a group of maybe 5 or 10 people who just kind of bar hopped, and there wasn't really much going on with it. And so when we took it over, we decided that this was going to be a community that was going to be a safe place for conservatives to really voice their opinions and be able to debate and continue in that dialogue of developing our understanding and our political rhetoric. So it's been a very powerful 8 months, and we're gearing up for election season. So it's going to be great.
So full disclosure, I think I actually am a member. People know I used to live in Palm Beach. I just moved back to DC, and Ashton is a dear friend of mine. But Ashton, if you could just walk us through your thoughts. I saw you at the Turning Point ActCon event where War Room was at doing the live show. But If you could just sort of give us your thoughts. Obviously, it was a younger crowd, but also specifically, we know there were a lot of young people, young activist types there. But there also was one person who certainly wasn't there, someone by the name of, I think, Governor Ron DeSantis or DeSantis. I don't even know how you pronounce it. But just your thoughts on ActCon.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I was talking to somebody about that the other day. It's really disappointing that Ron could not make it there. And I don't believe it was on accident. I don't believe it was a scheduling conflict. I believe it's just a reflection of his cowardice that he carries. And to be honest, I feel bad for him. I mean, if my wife was dragging me through the campaign trail and, propping me up and being backed by the donors, such as the Bushes and, the Soroses of the world, and really being set up for failure, I think I would probably not want to show up either. So, it's just a reflection of that cowardice, unlike Donald Trump, who took the stage by storm. The crowd was electric and everybody was excited to listen to every single word he had to say. And again, I just think it's a reflection of what we need on the global scale, which is a leader, which is not, unfortunately, Ron DeSantis for president.
See, Ashton, she looks nice. She looks nice and classy, but she definitely brings out the punches, like we say, murderers row. Here in the war room, Ashton, you have a really, I think, unique expertise and grasp on what young people, obviously, as the president of Palm Beach Young Republicans, are interested in. I know, like I said, I've been to a lot of your events, that it seems like most of the people in the club support Donald Trump. That sort of seems to be the general sentiment. I think Trump, what was it? He got 86% of the poll. At Turning Point, Vivek was second behind him. But there was a wonderful article in ABC. I guess they're now on the payroll of the Trump campaign, because it basically read like a free ad, but saying that the only reason people would vote for Trump is to get revenge on the government. It goes through the administrative state, the crazy conspiracy that they're waging war on us. And a lot of times, I think when we talk about the youth vote and why people are drawn to conservatism, it's more the cultural issues, social issues, the economy. But from what you're hearing, I'm just curious, in your opinion, do you think Donald Trump's messaging, particularly on waging war against the administrative state, this concept of retribution, is that something that young people, again, in the 20 to 30 age group, that demographic, something that they can understand and really get behind?
Yes, I would say absolutely. I think that is one of the most powerful messages. When the left makes fun of it and says, "Oh, Donald Trump is threatening retribution," we would say, exactly. That is exactly why we want him. I mean, even look at the rise of Andrew Tate and men like him. Donald Trump carries the courage and conviction that I think every young 20 and 30-year-old wishes that they could have. So I think it's magnetic, absolutely.
So with the club, we were talking about how you've expanded it. I know we've talked about how you've sort of been molding it after the New York Young Republicans. I'm obviously a member of the DC YRs here. But that has really given you, I think, an in with like the grassroots, right, in Palm Beach County. And obviously the grassroots totally descended on Palm Beach for Turning Point ActCon. I know you guys had a booth there. Just curious, sort of the temperature on the ground for the members of the War Room Posse who weren't fortunate enough to make it to the conference. What was it actually like getting the chance to talk with the activists there? What were some of the issues that were really on the forefront of people's minds? What do people want to talk to you about?
So a lot of the young people are really concerned with the economy, right? I mean, the inflation is ridiculous. We're sending trucks and truckloads of cash to Ukraine, which is ridiculous. And Donald Trump really is the only person that's talking about putting America first. Ron DeSantis is not. Vivek is following that. And I think even RFK Jr. is also copying some of that messaging. And so a lot of people are discussing Vivek. Vivek was very popular this weekend. I think he's growing in popularity, but I think a lot of it is trailing the messaging of Donald Trump. And, same thing with RFK Jr. All of them in the top three most popular over Ron DeSantis. DeSantis didn't even make it to the top three. All of the underlying theme there is the same thing of what we're talking about, is taking it to the globalists and coming back and putting America first. And so, whether you're Democrat or Republican, I think that's some of the most popular and powerful messaging that we have. And it's what most people are talking about right now.
I think you and I, even you and I, are old enough to remember when Turning Point's slogan, was "Big Government Sucks," and that was only, 6-7 years ago. But it really shows how far we've come, where we're not just talking about big government, but we're now talking about the collusion of really what is global government with big tech, big pharma, really big everything to really suppress all the fundamental freedoms and civil liberties that we have, not because the government says we have, but because God and the Constitution say we do. Ashton, we got to jump in about 90 seconds. So I want you to plug the club and let people know how they can get involved, what upcoming events you have, and more importantly, if they want to find you on social media, where can they find you?
Yes, absolutely. So if you are in Palm Beach County and you'd like to come to some of our events, you can find us at palmbeachyr.com. You can also follow us on Instagram. It's at palmbeachyr. My Instagram is at ashonpoint with an E. And we would love to have you. We're building our campaigns committee right now for this season, and we will be fully backing President Donald Trump to be 47 over 45. So
we got some breaking news there. I know we won't get too much into it because I think we have a press release, some more news coming out, but I'm sure you'll be back on War Room to break all that good stuff. And I hear you met Trump yesterday, which is pretty cool. Ashton, we got to let you go, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being such a good friend. But War Room Posse, we still got a packed show. We got Morgonn McMichael from Turning Point USA, and of course, Mike Davis, a War Room favorite, walking us through the latest really legal battles that the Biden regime is waging on the American people with regard to their ability to censor and collude freedom of speech on all platforms, whether it's elections, vaccines, you name it. But we will be right back, and thank you for joining us.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. It's still not Stephen K. Bannon. You got Natalie Winters still hosting, but don't fret. Steve will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I think for the afternoon show too, but we'll actually be heading on Wednesday to Trump's golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey to do a live show ahead of the screening of Sound of Freedom, which is, of course, a wonderful movie. You should definitely go see it if you haven't already, or go see it again for a second time, a third time, even a fourth time. I think it would probably be better every subsequent time. But joining me now is someone who I don't believe has ever been on War Room before, but we were fortunate enough to briefly meet at Turning Point ActCon, is a contributor to Turning Point USA, but a social media influencer with quite a sizable following. Her name is Morgonn McMichael. And she's been covering and focusing on an issue that I think is something that maybe is a little out of the, I would say, regular lexicon of a typical War Room viewer, but the mainstream media really has had their head in a tailspin over what Turning Point USA, shows like Alex Clark, have been doing, waging a war really against hormonal birth control and its negative effects on women. Of course, Big Pharma loves to omit a lot of those details and data, just like they have with COVID-19 vaccines. So Turning Point really has been facing a lot of criticism and attacks for what they've been trying to do. They would say spread misinformation and disinformation to young women. So Morgonn, if we have you, I'd love for you sort of to explain the criticism and attacks that you guys have been receiving, particularly on your efforts to really raise the red flag about what I think is really, you could call it Big Pharma's war on women, particularly when it comes to hormonal birth control.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie, for having me on War Room today. The wage on war on women with hormonal birth control has been insane over the past decade. Ever since the modern feminist movement took over, I mean, hormonal birth control is prescribed to sometimes even 13 and 14-year-olds going into their doctor's office seeking help for their menstrual cycles, and they end up having these long-term side effects that are not clearly told to these young women. And now there's even an over-the-counter pill that is going to be available in July. This was just FDA approved, which is completely scary, especially for young women who are seeking help with contraceptives. They're saying that this is going to be the most effective oral contraceptive on the over-the-counter, the only over-the-counter pill available. But then even things like Nexplanon, IUDs, hormonal birth control is really against women. And Big Pharma is trying to push this on every single woman and really making it a Band-Aid fix for all women to just go on birth control to solve all their problems, where instead it's actually causing them long-term side effects. They don't know the side effects, and causing them very much just horrible things like bleeding. Women also have hormone imbalances. Some women are even chemically castrated by using hormonal birth control. overtly for too long and not being prescribed the right amounts. So Turning Point USA, we've gotten a lot of backlash, especially with Alex Clark after the past month during the Young Women's Leadership Summit, raising awareness and talking about the red flags and side effects and dangers of these young girls being prescribed hormonal birth control without actually knowing the side effects and what could happen to their bodies in the future.
So we focus a lot on this show about how Big Pharma has certainly waged war on the American people when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. We have obviously Dr. Naomi Wolf, Dr. Malone, Dr. McCullough, who've really led the charge on exposing not just the inefficacy, but I really think posing the question when they say the cure was supposed or shouldn't have been worse than the disease. They're actually saying, was the cure in some ways the disease? But I want to I'm curious to at least get your opinion and your take on the, I would say, attack and crusade that Big Pharma has been on to push and normalize birth control, sort of through the lens or the paradigm of what they did with the COVID-19 vaccine. In other words, do you think that Big Pharma is sort of intentionally obscuring some of these data points that are indicating that hormonal birth control might not just be some catch-all solution, might not just be some panacea to health problems that young women are having, but they're pushing for it first and foremost because they know it drives their profits up. But more importantly, what I'm curious to get your opinion on, they've also sort of waged information warfare, right? In other words, they're purposely trying to cover up the side effects and calling people like me and you who talk about this, crazy conspiracy theorists.
Right. And they've absolutely labeled conservatives against hormonal birth control as right-wing conspiracy theorists. And you know what? Some birth control for women may be safe and effective, but largely slapping a Band-Aid on it and saying birth control is safe and effective for all women just is not the case. And absolutely, Big Pharma has completely lied to women. And I think the feminist movement has a huge play in this, since they have really taken on, ever since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, taking birth control now in their hands as, well, since we can't get abortions, everyone get on birth control, which now we've seen the over-the-counter birth control now become available in July. And that is what I think is the most scary, is that Big Pharma is now pushing for even younger women to be prescribed birth control. They're not telling the side effects. They're not being transparent with the data that is clearly coming out with the side effects that women could have. I mean, women will go years without having their period and thinking that it's normal, and then possibly being infertile for years upon removing birth control from their bodies and having to completely rebalance their systems. So it's definitely really scary to see the effects that Big Pharma has. I mean, they're getting richer where they're sickening their entire generation of women. The U.S. birth rate has been at an all-time low in decades. And now we're just continuing to completely medicate women as young as 13 years old. And they're completely messing up the puberty cycle and women's cycles for the rest of their lives. And so 100% this has to do with COVID. Look at Big Pharma and how they treated COVID-19 with the vaccinations, and they're doing the exact same thing by medicating women all the same for completely different reasons, not even checking people's hormones before prescribing them a birth control pill, which is not a safe pill for every single woman. It's very scary. It's very real. But one thing I have to say about this new birth control pill coming out, the O pill in July, is that it's over the counter. There's never been a birth control pill available where you can get progesterone, which is completely ruins women's bodies in some cases, just by going to a pharmacy or even a gas station now. And my fear is young women are going to be taking this medication not properly and harming their systems even more than they would be if they were prescribed it by a doctor or even talking to their parents.
Well, look, you really hit the signal and not the noise. And I know this isn't an issue that we usually cover on Steve Bannon's War Room, but why it's so important is because people have to remember, it's the same voices, the same establishment that's telling us that we shouldn't have children because of climate change. It's the same administration, Kamala Harris, who allegedly misspeaks when she says overpopulation is something that they're looking to fix and cure. So that's why I've always thought that this issue, even though, like I said, it's not the typical focus of Steve Bannon's War Room, but it is important because it links to all of the broader stories that we do cover on this show. So Morgan, I got to let you go in about 2 or 3 minutes, but if you could just tell us a little bit about what exactly it is that you do with Turning Point. And I know specifically that you have a good pulse, or I guess I'm on the pulse of younger voters, people our age. I don't get to interact with a lot of young people. I work primarily with Steve. But give the audience some hope when it comes to young voices and young voters and young people and how they actually aren't just, or let's say actually they are conspiracy theorists, and I use that term endearingly.
Absolutely. I am very, very hopeful for our future, especially going in the 2024 election. I mean, if you look at Gen Z, we are one of the largest voting blocs. And this past weekend at Turning Point Action ActCon, it's so cool to see how many young Gen Zers were present at that conference. Turning Point USA also hosted our chapter leadership summit this past week, where over 700 key chapter leaders from our thousands of high school and college chapters across the country joined for a leadership training so that they could go out, boots on the ground, get involved in their communities, and be active in their communities to continue pushing the conservative movement. So me as a contributor, it was super, super fulfilling to be able to meet so many of our student activists, our TPUSA chapter leaders, being able to hear from the speakers this weekend and be filled with so much of conservatism in our society. And so do not lose hope for everybody out there. Gen Z, we are a force to be reckoned with because we are not backing down. And there are hundreds of us across the nation, thousands of us across the nation who are not stopping and going to continue talking about the conservative movement on high school and college campuses and on social media. And I think it's just really important that we continue to push the conservative movement, talk about our values, and stand firm as Gen Z because we are not all lost. Hope is not gone. Just take a look at ActCon and CLS that happened this past week, and you saw thousands of shining faces of young Gen Zers that are hungry to be more politically active and hungry to be active in their communities.
Morgan, thank you so much for making the audience, I think for once in their life, optimistic after watching a War Room episode. If people want to stay up to date with what you're working on, watch your content, where can they find you on all the various social media platforms?
The War Room audience can find me anywhere, any social media platform. My first name, Morgonn, Morgonn. If you can spell it, you can find me everywhere and on all TPUSA channels.
Morgan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie.
Now, our next guest, no shade, but he may not be a member of Gen Z. We are talking about hair loss in the break, but it is Mike Davis, a very good friend of the show. I don't know if he would still consider me a friend after what I just said, but Mike Davis, legal mind, legal extraordinaire. I wanted to have him on the show. I love when I host. I always just text Mike. I'm like, please come on and help me figure out what to say. But no, I'm just kidding. I always know what I want to say. But Mike, I thought we had a victory when it came to stopping the Biden regime from colluding with the federal government and the social media platforms to silence basically this show, although given what we wanted to talk about, I don't even know if it'd be worth their effort. But Mike, it seems like that's no longer the case. Can you walk us through the latest?
Well, now that Natalie has falsely accused me of having a toupee, which I do not have, so I do think that the Biden administration should censor this blatant misinformation and disinformation. It's horrible what she's spreading. No. What we have with Judge Doty down in the Western District of Louisiana, he put out an injunction saying that the Biden administration, the executive branch, cannot collude with big tech officials to censor Americans, and that should just be basic 101 First Amendment constitutional common sense. That's currently being reviewed on appeal. There's a temporary administrative stay so the appellate court can get their arms around this case. But this is an important case, and it hopefully will get resolved by the appellate court in a favorable way. And if it doesn't, the Supreme Court should take this and uphold this injunction, because we cannot have a government working with private actors, especially trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, to censor, silence, deplatform, and cancel conservatives and others with whom these leftists disagree. We saw during COVID how dangerous censorship is. They censored doctors and scientists for merely questioning what the COVIDians, led by Tony Fauci, were putting out there. The COVIDians ended up being wrong in many instances, and that led to unnecessary human suffering and death. And that cannot continue. We're not China yet, and we cannot go down this path.
I'm sure the Biden regime is also particularly ticked off that this ruling came out right now, because they definitely need the censorship industrial complex to be coming out in full force with all the information that's coming out about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the whistleblowers. It seems like there's a new whistleblower almost every other day. It seems like there was actually just a new announcement from the House Oversight Committee talking about how they had, I believe it was a transcribed interview with an FBI agent, basically confirming a lot of what the first IRS whistleblower had said about Joe Biden and his involvement in this pay-for-play scheme. Mike, I know you're usually a harsh critic, and 9 times out of 10 justifiably so, of what oversight and weaponization are doing. But if you could just give the posse an update on where we stand with finally getting to the bottom of Biden family corruption, and hopefully, for Pete's sake, or I guess I shouldn't say Pete's sake because that might be a reference to pedo Pete, which is what I believe his contact was on Hunter's laptop, but getting Joe Biden and Hunter Biden behind bars.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of James Comer on the House Oversight Committee. I was a critic of Jim Jordan on the House Judiciary Committee because of his stance on big tech, and he needs to get better on big tech, but he's starting to do a really good job on oversight. So I want to commend both of them, and they're starting to unravel the Biden crime family's business, illegal corruption business around the world. And that is so important. We have allegations that a sitting president of the United States is compromised by a $10 million foreign bribe. As the sitting vice president of the United States, he allegedly took a $10 million bribe from Burisma, Ukrainian oligarchs, and changed American policy, threatened to cut off $1 billion in U.S. aid if the Ukrainian president did not fire the Ukrainian prosecutor investigating Burisma and the Bidens. And remember, President Obama put then Vice President Joe Biden in charge of Ukraine, and they cashed in handsomely, corruptly, illegally, according to this evidence that's been before the FBI since at least 2017. We also have the House Oversight Committee finding tens of millions of dollars more in corruption from Chinese and maybe Romanian oligarchs. We're talking maybe $30 million that went to the Biden family. It seems like every Biden got a piece of this except for the 4-year-old granddaughter in Arkansas who Joe and Jill Biden don't claim because they're absolute scumbag, terrible people for not claiming this granddaughter. But, I mean, look what we have. We have a 53-year-old drug addict loser son living in the White House, flying on Air Force One, flying on Marine One, staying at Camp David. Why is Joe Biden keeping this guy so close? And you have to wonder, is it because Hunter Biden is the bagman? Why is Joe Biden's Justice Department coming up with these sweetheart deals to protect Hunter Biden? Because they're obviously protecting Joe Biden. And so these the House Judiciary Committee, the House Oversight Committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, this should be their number one priority. And it looks like it is, which is good. And that is figuring out whether the President of the United States is compromised by foreign bribes and other corruption. Because if he's compromised, he can't stay in office.
Speaking of drug-addicted scumbag sons, I like the way you say that so classily. Just curious your thoughts on how the Secret Service concluded their investigation of the cocaine incident, which I guess there were previous incidents with other drugs. So I guess diversity really is our strength when it comes to Hunter Biden and his drug habit. But your thoughts, just how bald-faced of a lie it is for the Biden regime to conclude this investigation. Actually, I won't even use the term investigation, to just conclude it without any real evidence.
It's obviously a cover-up. I mean, we have a video of Hunter Biden on the Truman balcony on the 4th of July with the scumbag Biden family, and he turns around and looks like he is snorting cocaine behind Joe and Jill Biden. And it's pretty obvious that Jill saw this and recognized it because she did one of these looks with Joe to Hunter. I mean, it's very obvious whose cocaine this was in the White House. And the funny thing is of course, when they first found it, there were leaks out of the White House that they tried to blame Kamala Harris. So, of course, let's blame the black woman in the White House and not Hunter Biden, the obvious suspect of who would be smuggling cocaine into the Biden White House.
It's so clear why they need such a massive and really just totalitarian censorship industrial complex because of the stories that are continuing to leak out of the White House, right? It's a lot harder to suppress all of these just horribly degenerate stories that should have nothing anywhere near the White House. So no wonder why they need CISA and all of these 3 and 4 letter agencies to help kind of clean up the mess. I know when the story first broke about the social media ruling, they really honed in on CISA, which I always say is the agency that you've probably never heard of, but they've definitely heard of you. That is, of course, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Again, I think it sort of speaks to the weird priorities of the Biden regime. In other words, we keep seeing these, global hacks going on. The Chinese Communist Party is obviously waging cyber warfare on us, and the agency that's tasked with combating that, cybersecurity, right? They're too busy censoring Americans on what they're saying about election integrity. Mike, we got about 2 minutes before I got to let you go. Can you just stress the importance, especially for the members of Congress who listen to this show, those on the Hill, on these committees, on the Weaponization Committee, why they really should be drilling down on CISA?
They should be drilling down on CISA. This is an agency that's part of the Department of Homeland Security. And anytime there is any government entity that thinks it's their job to decide what is correct or incorrect information being shared and debated among American people, that agency needs to be shut down immediately. It needs to be defunded immediately. You can't get more dangerous in a democracy than having the federal government shut down a government agency, or then shut down debate and free speech in a country.
I think that'll be one of the top priorities of day one of the Trump administration. Mike, we got to let you go. We got to end this show. But if people want to find you, where can they go to on social media?
Thank you, Natalie. They could donate at article3project.org, article number 3project.org, at article 3 project, at article number 3 project on Getter, Twitter, Truth, and my personal is at MRDDMIA, MRDDMIA.
Mike Davis, I won't say you wear a toupee so we don't get flagged for misinformation, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon. And War Room Posse, thank you for hanging with me on this Monday afternoon. Like I said, Steve will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. and for the afternoon show. But in the meantime, head over to warroom.org. We got a lot of great stories breaking about Matt Gaetz, about the Chinese Communist Party, Hunter Biden, and of course, with the Biden regime, the lengths they're going to cover up for international trafficking of minors. And while you're at it, go see Sound of Freedom. Again, Natalie Winters, thank you for joining, and we'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m.